Is it hard to set boundaries around marijuana with your teenager? Let's talk about that on today's Tips on Teens. My name is Kent Toussaint. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in helping kids, teens, and families live happier lives. I lead two organizations, the group private practice Teen Therapy Center and the nonprofit organization Child and Teen Counseling, both here in Woodland Hills, California. Every Wednesday at noon, I come into your Facebook feed live on Facebook Live to answer your parenting questions. Let's jump into today's question. What are your thoughts on marijuana? Long story short, my wife and I gave in to our son and allowed him to smoke weed as long as he got it from us and only smoked in the backyard at home. That way we can control what he is using. Turns out, he didn't follow the rules and was smoking more and secretly meeting friends to smoke late at night while we were asleep. I don't think we can really stop him, and I'd rather him smoke than drink or do other drugs. But I am worried about how much he is smoking and how it may be affecting him. He is about to be 17. Any advice? Yes, lots of it. So, a teenager using marijuana is different than an adult using marijuana. A teenager's brain is still developing, and that brain is still developing until early to mid-20s. So what happens is when there's habitual smoking of marijuana, the THC, which is the psychoactive chemical in marijuana that creates the high feeling, attaches to the cannabinoid receptors in the brain. So what does that do? That impacts your teenager's ability to learn, to adapt, to manage time, to multitask, to adapt to his feelings, to build resilience. That is all impaired, and smoking habitually starts reshaping the brain and cutting off connections. So that could be impairing not only short-term, but long-term development in his brain, which can be a problem. Another thing is, if he is smoking, even when he feels the high go away, the next day, his brain is still impaired for 2, maybe 3 days after he smokes. He may not be aware of it, he won't feel it, but his ability to learn and adapt is impaired. Now, your teenager is probably saying, wait a minute, it helps me deal with my anxiety, it helps me sleep, it helps me focus, I can't sleep, I can't cope. If I don't have weed, I feel like I'm going crazy, I need it. Why can't I have this medicine instead of the medicine you want from the doctor? And you're thinking, and then he says, and it's all natural. It's healthy. At least it's not some chemical. It's grown from the earth. And why can't I do it? You did it when you were a teenager. And you're left slack-jawed going, I don't know how to argue with that. Just don't do it, right? So the important thing to remember is that marijuana is much more intense than it was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It has been bred and formulated to be have a stronger, potent high. You also don't know what kind of pesticides, because it's kind of unregulated how much pesticides are used, and pesticides are often used. Most teenagers, in fact, I don't think I've ever met a teenager who smokes weed medicinally. They smoke it to get baked and have a lot of fun. If they're smoking medicinally, they're probably not getting high. And they're probably going more towards CBD, which is another active ingredient in marijuana, but does not give you that high feeling. And again, that's something you can get over the counter. You can get that at a drugstore and buy it. There's no age limit on that. So he's probably not regulating it. If he was getting medication from a doctor, it would be prescribed. He'd have a certain dosage. He'd be monitored by the doctor, make sure that he's not getting too much or too little. So there's a lot of effects, again, that using too much weed can impact long-term and short-term. In fact, I included in the text below about 4 different websites about that to go in more detail for you, so I don't want to bore you with this video on that. So how are you going to deal with this with your teenager? If your teenager is so dependent that he's smoking habitually, daily, he needs help, whether that's getting a therapist, whether that's going to Marijuana Anonymous meetings, whether that's going to an outpatient program or an inpatient program, and you'll say, wait, that much treatment for marijuana? Absolutely, because it is addictive. Again, it's not heroin, and people say, well, at least it's not heroin. You're right, but it's not broccoli either. Remember, it's not the healthy alternative. It is a less dangerous alternative to cocaine or heroin or something else like that. And habitual marijuana use can lead to other drugs down the line. Not necessarily, but it can. And also, the more you smoke weed, the less effect it has at relieving anxiety, less effect it has of helping you sleep, because you build this tolerance. It goes up and up and up. So it becomes less and less effective. And so you have a really high tolerance. You don't feel that high anymore, but you still feel a dependence to it. And so I think that's really important to talk to him and get him treatment and help figure out, why does he need this marijuana? Are there other ways that he can develop resilience to cope with anxiety, depression, all these uncomfortable feelings that we all deal with all the time, and how do we help with that? One of the things I wanted to say is, if he's resistant to therapy and resistant to help, you may need to step it up a notch. You may need to, if it's really bad, he's not going to school, if it's to the point where his anger is going out of control, which can happen with marijuana, you may need to, get him into an inpatient treatment center. If you're not sure how to do that, call them. There are several inpatient treatment centers. They will tell you how to get him to that hospital or that clinic. You may need to figure out how to send him to a boarding school. Again, these are extreme situations. Therapeutic boarding school, it's not always the most ideal situation, but if it's going to such an extreme, you may need to do that. Hopefully you can just do that with outpatient individual therapy. That would be best. And maybe marijuana anonymous means. But again, just because you send him to therapy doesn't mean he's going to initially just want to, stop smoking. The therapist's not going to have a magic wand and say, stop smoking, he's going to stop. It's getting him to start seeing the patterns. And also, if his whole social life is bent around weed, you're going to need to help him transition out of that and find a whole new social circle. Because if even if he goes to a 30-day treatment program, and he comes back out, he goes back to the same friends, he's going to go right back to the same patterns. It's a big, complicated issue. Obviously, we can't cover every possibility in one video, but hopefully this gets you started. Hopefully this gets you to talk to a therapist in your area, get some help and support. But again, smoking marijuana every day for a teenager, generally not the best idea. Not as bad as heroin, and some may say not as bad as alcohol, and we're not going to debate that here. But again, it doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means it may be a less dangerous alternative. So anyways, that's our question for today. Thank you for your questions. Keep them coming. You can email us your questions at tipsonteens@teentherapycenter.com. Again, my name is Kent Toussaint from Teen Therapy Center and Child and Teen Counseling, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday at noon in your Facebook feed. Bye-bye.